The sky above Cressa Prime was filled with fire as enemy warships descended from orbit, their weapons burning cities and turning the once green world into a battlefield. Screams echoed through the mountains and across the fields as people ran for shelter, but there was little hope. The Thaur Dominion had returned, bringing destruction with them like a wave of flame. On board the Valor's Reach, one of Earth's last assault cruisers, Captain Darius Holt stood with clenched fists, staring at the screen that showed the disaster unfolding below. He had seen this before years ago when another colony fell, but this time he had the power to fight back. His ship moved swiftly through the upper atmosphere, avoiding enemy fire, scanning for survivors. Every outpost they passed had gone silent. Each signal that once glowed with life now blinked out one after another, until only one small signal remained, a weak pulse from a broken structure near the edge of the capital ruins. Darius leaned closer, saw a tiny escape pod hidden beneath rubble, and ordered an immediate descent. The crew hesitated, warning him the area was unstable and filled with enemy scouts, but he gave no room for debate. He went down himself. The shuttle cut through thick smoke as it landed, and Darius stepped out into chaos. The sky was darkened with ash, fires raged all around, and bodies of fallen soldiers and civilians lay in the dirt. He moved quickly, following the signal to a broken wall where a pod was wedged between steel beams and stone. With all his strength, he pulled the debris away and forced the pod open. Inside, curled in fear, was a young alien girl. Her skin was pale violet, her eyes glowing softly in the darkness, and she looked no older than 10. She stared at him in silence, trembling as if expecting death. Instead, he reached out a hand, knelt beside her, and said gently, "You're safe now." She did not speak, but slowly took his hand. Darius wrapped her in his coat and carried her through the ruins, shielding her from falling glass and bursts of flame. When the shuttle lifted off, enemy fighters appeared, but the Valor's Reach blasted them out of the sky, clearing a path. Back aboard the ship, medics rushed to take the girl, but she kept her eyes on Darius, never letting go of his hand until she finally fell asleep. She had no name, no family, no one left. Darius made sure she was taken to safety, given food, warmth, and care. Days later, when he had to return to the fight, he stood by her bedside one last time. She opened her eyes and in a quiet voice asked, "Why did you save me?" He paused, then smiled and said, "Because someone had to." Then he left, and the war continued. He never saw her again. The memory faded into the long years of battle, buried beneath victories and losses. He told himself she had lived a better life somewhere far from war. But deep down, he always wondered. He never forgot her eyes, the fear, the silence, the spark of something strong hidden beneath it all. That spark had stayed with him, even as the galaxy burned. He had saved her once, never knowing who she truly was or what she might become. And now, many years later, he was about to find out. 20 years passed since the war on Cressa Prime. The galaxy changed, but danger never left. The United Human Alliance grew stronger, building colonies, warships, and defenses across many systems, but peace was never certain. Whispers came from deep space, rumors of a new power rising from the old ashes of the Thaur Dominion, of a ruler never seen but greatly feared. They called her the Silver Flame, a queen with a mind sharper than any blade and an army that never lost. Human. Fleets clashed with Thaura warbands more often, and each time it became harder to win. One morning, Earth's capital awoke to an alert. An unidentified ship approached alone. No fleet, no escort, just a single royal vessel shaped like a spear of light. It entered orbit without resistance. People expected weapons or destruction. Instead, the ship landed calmly near the Earth Council's tower. Soldiers surrounded it, ready to fight, but the ramp lowered and out stepped a woman. She was tall and graceful, dressed in silver armor that shimmered like fire. Her horns curved gently, her eyes were bright gold, and though alien in form, her face carried calm power. She walked straight into the chamber where Earth's leaders waited, ignoring their guards in silence. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but every word struck like thunder. She said, "I am Queen Syraxa of the Phalleri Ascendancy. I come in peace, but we have little time." The council didn't believe her. They shouted, accusing her of trickery, of plotting invasion. Some called for her arrest. But General Darius Holt, now older and scarred by years of war, entered the room and stopped in his tracks. The alien queen turned her head slowly, and their eyes met. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Her voice changed, became gentle, and she said, "You saved me when I was a child, Darius Holt. You carried me from fire and ruin. Now I have returned not to fight you, but because we both face a greater war." The room went still. Darius stepped forward, unsure if what he saw was real. Her face had changed, matured, her body stronger, her presence royal, but those eyes, those same glowing eyes filled with strength and memory, he knew them. She bowed her head slightly and spoke again, this time not to the council but to him. "You gave me life when you didn't have to. I never forgot. And now I come not as your enemy, but as your ally. There are Thalra who follow me now, but many more prepare to destroy us both. A weapon is being built in secret, a force that can wipe out stars. If we don't stop them together, your people and mine will vanish." Darius looked at her long and hard, then nodded once. The council didn't know what to do. They were afraid, uncertain. But Darius had seen war, and he knew when someone spoke truth. He remembered the girl he saved from the fire, and he saw in this queen the same soul. She was no longer a child and no longer alone. She had power now, but she chose to come to Earth not with warships, but with warning. She stood before them, not as a conqueror, but as a bridge between enemies. The choice was clear. Trust her, and maybe they could survive what was coming. Refuse her, and face the storm alone. Darius turned to the council and spoke firmly, "I believe her. And if she's right, then we have no time to waste." The room fell silent, the future now hanging in the balance. The council chamber filled with loud voices in anger as leaders stood from their seats, shouting that Syraxa could not be trusted, that she was still Thalra and her presence alone was a danger. Some called for her to be locked away. Others said she should be sent back into space, far from Earth. But Darius didn't move. He watched her closely, not with fear, but with a soldier's instinct. She stood calm, even as dozens argued around her, her hands folded in front of her, golden eyes steady. When the noise became too much, she raised her voice, not shouting, just speaking clearly, and her words silenced the room. She told them the truth. There was a faction of the Thalra Empire that refused her rule, the same faction that once led the war against humanity. They had disappeared after their defeat, but they had not stopped fighting. In secret, they had been building a weapon so terrible that even stars would fall before it. They called it the Maw, a machine powered by a gravity core one strong, enough to crush entire planets from light years away. It was not yet complete, but close. Once it was ready, no one would be safe Thalra, rebels, humans, or any other species. It was madness, Syraxa said, and it had to be stopped. That was why she had come. Not for friendship, not for peace, but because survival was only possible together. Darius stepped forward and told the council what he knew. He reminded them of the girl he had once saved during a different war, a girl who had no reason to trust humans, yet now stood before them warning of death. She didn't have to come, he said. She could have waited for the maw to fire. But she didn't. That tells me more than her words ever could. The council fell into silence again, this time not with rage, but with doubt. They turned their eyes to Siraxa. "If you speak the truth," one elder said, "then we need proof. Coordinates, ships, intel, something we can check." Siraxa nodded. She opened her palm and a device floated in the air, casting a map and light above them. It showed a system deep in uncharted space, hidden in a cloud of debris and broken moons. There, the maw was being built, protected by stolen Thalra warships and defense grids powered by star energy. "I can get you inside," she said. "I have loyal captains who will fight beside your fleet. But I need your ships, your firepower. We strike fast, and we strike hard. If we wait too long, we won't get another chance." The council didn't answer at first, but Darius stepped beside her and looked them all in the eye. "You know, Emmy, I've fought for Earth my whole life. I don't gamble with lives. If she says the maw is real, I believe her. And if she's willing to bleed with us, then I'll stand beside her." After a long pause, the council agreed. Not all of them were happy, but the vote passed. An alliance was born in that chamber between old enemies, sealed not with a treaty, but with a shared promise to stop a weapon that could end all life. Siraxa turned to Darius before she left the room and said softly, "You saved me once. Let me help save your people now." Darius nodded and said, "Then let's make them regret ever starting this war." As he followed her out of the chamber, plans for the largest joint strike mission in human history began. The countdown to war had started, and this time humanity wasn't alone. The human fleet moved through deep space like shadows, their black ships built for speed and power, engines silent in the cold dark. At their side flew a smaller fleet of alien ships, sleek and sharp, painted in violet and silver, the colors of Queen Siraxa's loyal followers. Together, they headed toward the hidden system Siraxa had shown the council. It was a place few had dared to enter, full of broken moons and drifting debris, perfect for hiding something terrible. Their goal was simple but dangerous: destroy the maw before it could ever be used. On board the Valor's Reach, now upgraded and leading the charge, General Darius Holt stood in the command center, eyes focused on the growing outline of the maw's shield grid on the screen. At his side was a young officer, nervous but ready. "We've never fought side by side with aliens," the officer said. Darius gave a half smile. "There's a first time for everything." In another part of the fleet, Queen Siraxa stood on the bridge of her dreadnought, the Starthorn, surrounded by captains loyal to her cause. She wore battle armor now, smooth as glass, glowing faintly at the seams. She watched the stars ahead, thinking of the day she had first met Darius and the promise she now carried. The fleet dropped out of light speed near the asteroid belt that protected the maw. The space around them was filled with spinning rock and wrecked machines, and hidden among them were enemy guns. The moment the human ships entered, alarms sounded. Defense cannons powered up and dozens of Thalra warships uncloaked, weapons charged. The trap had been set. Siraxa's voice came through the fleet-wide channel. "They knew we were coming, but they don't know who's coming for them." Darius gave the order. "All ships, full spread. Launch fighters, open fire." Space exploded in color. Human missiles streaked across the void, smashing into enemy shields. Alien fighters weaved through debris, dodging blasts and striking back. Massive beams of light tore across the darkness, slicing ships apart in flashes of flame. The Valor's Reach spun through the battle like a beast, guns roaring, taking down 2 enemy destroyers before they could fire. Darius barked orders, keeping the fleet moving, never slowing, always pressing forward. "We punch through that shield grid, or we all die out here." he shouted. On the Starthurn, Siraxa led her fleet into the thick of the fight, diving through the enemy lines with a skill that stunned even the humans. Her ship's claws tore into enemy hulls, breaking them apart. Her voice stayed calm, guiding her captains through chaos. Focus on the generators. Break the shield. We make them bleed. The enemy fought hard. Ships on both sides exploded, metal and flames scattering into space. Darius saw one of their cruisers go down, its escape pods launching just in time. The cost was high, but retreat was not an option. After hours of fighting, the first crack in the Maw's outer shield appeared, a glow, then a ripple, then a break. The human fleet poured through, driving toward the heart of the system. Behind the shield, the Maw came into view. It was huge, floating among asteroids like a black star, covered in spires and plates that spun slowly. At its center was the core chamber, glowing like a dying sun. Darius stared at it, a cold fear in his chest. That thing was built to end. Everything, he whispered. Then we end it first, Siraxa replied. Together they pushed deeper into the storm. The final battle had begun. The Maw was bigger than anyone had imagined, a black, spinning fortress floating in space, covered in spires and strange machines that looked like claws trying to tear the stars apart. Its surface moved slowly, as if breathing, and its center pulsed with a deep red light, the heart of the weapon, the gravity core. Around it, enemy ships swarmed, still fighting to keep the Allied fleet back. But the combined strength of human and Thalari warships had broken through the outer defenses. Darius Holt stood on the bridge of the Valor's Reach, staring at the monster ahead. The time for space combat was over. They had to go in and shut it down from the inside. There was no other way. Boarding parties launched in waves, flying into the Maw's docking ports through blasts of cannon fire and twisted debris. Darius led the first team himself, armored and armed, his old wound from Cressa Prime aching with every step. His boots hit the floor of the Maw's inner hangar as alarms screamed and enemy soldiers poured out from tunnels and blast doors. The halls were dark and narrow, filled with red lights and steam. The air was heavy, like the whole station was, alive and angry. With him were Earth Marines and Sirax's warriors, humans and aliens fighting side by side, their weapons glowing as they cut down defenders. The Thaura fanatics inside wore strange armor and fought with desperation, knowing this was their last stand. Darius pushed forward, kicking down doors, leading the charge through fire and smoke. Sirax's voice came through the comms as her own team moved through another section. We're nearing the core chamber, but the defenses are stronger here. They're using shield barriers and drones. We need to hit hard and fast. Darius nodded and moved faster, blasting through corridors and climbing a broken shaft where an elevator once stood. At the top, the final door opened to reveal the core room, a massive sphere of spinning energy surrounded by high walls and control stations. Red lightning danced along the walls, and the gravity inside pulled strangely, making their steps heavy and slow. Inside, machines hummed and lights blinked, counting down to something terrible. It's already started, Siraxa said, stepping into the chamber from the other side. Her armor was cracked, her arms scratched, but her eyes burned with purpose. If this weapon fires, it will tear every nearby system apart. Earth, Thalar, everything. Darius looked around. Can we shut it down? She studied the controls. Not from here. The core's been locked. There's only one way manual override. Someone has to go inside the field and pull the failsafe rods. Darius stepped forward. Then I'll do it. She grabbed his arm. No, you won't make it out. He looked into her eyes. Then what choice do we have? For a moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled sadly. Let me do it. He shook his head. Siraxa. But she stepped closer and whispered, "You saved me once when you didn't have to. Now let me return that gift." Before he could stop her, she ran toward the core. The field burned around her, sparks dancing across her skin as the energy pulled at her. She climbed onto a platform and forced open a hatch, reaching into the heart of the storm. Her armor cracked, her body glowing, her voice screaming in pain, but her hands didn't stop. She pulled one rod, then another, then the final one. The core flashed with a blinding light, then collapsed inward. The energy vanished and silence filled the room. The Maw's lights dimmed. The countdown ended. The weapon was dead. Darius stared at the platform. She was gone. The others looked around, quiet and stunned. No one spoke. A queen had just given her life to save 2 civilizations. And Darius, standing in the cold light of the dead weapon, felt the weight of her sacrifice press down harder than any gravity could. The chamber was silent, filled with smoke and faint sparks, the core now lifeless after the collapse. The spinning lights had stopped, the alarms had gone quiet, and the giant machine that was meant to destroy entire star systems now sat still like a dead heart. Darius stood at the edge of the platform, staring at the spot where Siraxa had vanished. One moment she had been beside him, strong and alive, and the next she had thrown herself into the burning core, forcing the override that saved billions. His body felt heavy, not just from the strange pull of the weakened gravity, but from the weight of what she had done. Around him, the soldiers lowered their weapons. Some looked at the glowing walls with confusion, others dropped to their knees, unable to speak. Darius barely heard the voices on the comms. His officers were calling his name, asking for orders, confirming that the weapon was no longer a threat. None of it mattered right then. He walked slowly across the cracked floor, stepping over cables and broken panels until he reached the control platform. The surface was scorched, melted where her hands had been. The glow of the fail-safe rods was still fading. There was no trace of her, no body, no sign of where the energy had taken her. Only silence. Darius felt a deep cold settle into his chest. He dropped to one knee and placed his hand on the burnt metal, remembering her voice, her strength. Way she had looked at him before she ran into the fire. He whispered her name once, but it echoed back at him like a ghost. Then the call came from orbit. The remaining Thaura forces, without the Maw, had begun to surrender. Their leaders were asking for peace, confused and shaken by the loss of their greatest weapon and the queen who had once stood among them. The war was ending. Victory was near. But it didn't feel like victory. The Allied ships began to retreat, taking the wounded, counting the fallen, leaving the ruined battlefield behind. The Valor's Reach returned to Earth as a hero's ship. But Darius did not feel like a hero. Days passed in silence. Ceremonies were held. Monuments were planned. Speeches were made in her honor Queen Siraxa, the alien who gave her life to stop a war that wasn't hers to fight. Darius stayed away from it all. He returned to Cressa Prime, the place where he had once pulled a frightened child from the rubble. Now, years later, that same place was peaceful again. Grass was growing where ash had once covered the ground. The ruins had been cleared, and homes were being rebuilt. Darius stood at the edge of a cliff one morning, looking out over the valley, remembering the past and wondering if he could have saved her too. The wind blew gently, and the sky was quiet. Then a soft hum broke the silence. A small ship landed behind him, light gray, simple, but clearly not human. He turned quickly, expecting an officer or maybe a diplomat, but what he saw made him freeze. The ramp opened, and from the shadow stepped Siraxa. She walked slowly, dressed in a simple cloak, her eyes tired but alive. There were no glowing lights. Around her, no armor, no guards. Just her. Darius stared, unable to speak. "You died," he finally whispered. She smiled weakly. Not quite. The energy didn't kill me. It sent me somewhere else. Somewhere between places. I had to fight to return. He stepped closer, unsure if he was dreaming. She reached out and touched his hand. Her touch was warm, real. I couldn't leave it unfinished, she said. Not with you still here. He took her hand and held it tightly. Neither of them said anything else for a long time. They just stood there, overlooking the land they had once saved together, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as something more. And behind them, the wind carried the sound of a world healing, one they had both helped protect with fire, with sacrifice, and with hope. Months passed since the destruction of the Maw, and though the scars of war still marked many worlds, peace had begun to grow like a fragile flower in the dirt left behind. The Thalra had surrendered after losing their greatest weapon and their belief in victory. With the Maw gone and Syrax's sacrifice echoing through every system, their leaders had no strength left to fight. They laid down their arms, and for the first time in decades, stars that once burned with fire and fear now shimmered in silence. On Earth, the people spoke her name with respect, Queen Syraxa, the alien who saved humanity. Statues were built. Songs were written. Children learned of her in stories of the day she stood beside a human general and faced the end of all things. But Darius Holt did not feel like celebrating. He returned to Cressa Prime, where everything had begun, the planet, where he had once found a little alien girl hiding under broken stone during a terrible fire. Now the world was green again. The air was clean, the trees had grown tall, and rivers flowed through hills that had once been ash. Darius walked alone through the hills every morning, wearing no uniform, no armor, just simple clothes. He watched the sky and thought of her. Every time the wind passed through the grass, he remembered her voice, her eyes, her strength. Then, one morning, a sound broke the quiet. A ship landed gently on a flat field near the old cliffs. Darius turned, his heart still heavy, expecting perhaps a diplomat or a soldier. But then he saw her. Syraxa stepped from the ship slowly, dressed in a soft robe, her long hair drifting in the breeze. She was not wearing her crown or armor. She looked different, older, calmer, yet somehow more alive. Darius froze, unable to believe it. "You were gone," he said quietly. "I saw you vanish into the core." She nodded. "I almost didn't return. The energy pulled me into a place outside of time. I thought I would never find my way back." He took a step forward. "Why now?" She looked at him and smiled gently. "Because this is where it all began. And because I made a promise to return, if I could, to see the world we saved." He walked toward her without a word, and when they stood face to face, she reached out and took his hand, just like she had when she was a child. But now her grip was steady, strong. He held it tightly. Together, they walked along the cliffside, looking down at the valley below, where life had returned after destruction. Children played in the fields, and homes stood where ruins once lay. The sky was blue, filled with soft clouds and light. They said nothing at first, but there was peace in their silence. After all the fire and blood, they had earned it. She looked at the land and whispered, "This is what we fought for." Darius nodded. "And what we'll protect together if you stay." She smiled again, and this time there was no pain behind it. "I'm not going anywhere." As the sun rose behind them, casting golden light across the land, they stood side by side, two survivors from different worlds, no longer enemies, no longer lost. They had faced war, death, and impossible choices. And now they faced something even greater, a future filled with hope.